Welcome to the Culture Encounters podcast. I'm your host, Chad Ownby, and we have a really cool episode here for you tonight. It's another hybrid episode. We're continuing to meet our board members of Culture Encounters, and we have the rare opportunity to have a conversation with our board member, but also continue our road trip series with Rhode Island. That's right. We're going to be talking about things Rhode Island, as well as getting to meet our board member, Mariama Jallow. So that's enough of me talking. Let's go ahead and bring in Mariama. Hey, Mariama, how are you?
Hi, Shad.
Hi,
How
thanks.
are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Thanks for being here today and talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Oh
Appreciate
yeah,
the warm welcome.
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're any warmth I'm sure is appreciated because before we went on the air, Mariama was telling me how cold it is in Rhode Island right now. So I can imagine. I can't even imagine it's been cold in Virginia. Uh, It's got to be like an ice box up there
It is brutally
comparatively.
cold right now.
Oh my gosh.
I
And
wouldn't trade it for the world, though.
and that's amazing. And we're gonna get to all things Rhode Island, and I can't wait
Right,
for that. Because I've never been, so I'm looking forward to learning about it. So let's go ahead and get started with our first kind of part of this. So talk a little bit about what brought you to Culture Encounters, and
right.
when you hear that word culture, what does that mean to you? What does the word culture mean to you, and how has the idea of different cultures affected your life?
Right. So, what brought me to Culture Encounters? This probably started for me about 2.5, 3 years ago. Felt the urge of wanting to give it back. And again, as we all know, COVID has done the most to us in a good way and a bad way. So, in looking to want to give it back, I was in search of wanting to join a board, be part of something, and giving it back to a community. It didn't matter for me what community it was. I would have preferred a community in Rhode Island, but the stars weren't aligned for that, and I ended up at Culture Encounters, and I don't regret it at all. So actually, it was Marilyn. Who I began to communicate with
Right.
via LinkedIn itself. And one thing led to another. And when Culture Encounters was interviewing me for a board position, it was around the same time that another board was interviewing me for a board position. But I wanted to ensure that it's a right fit in terms of what I aspire and what I dream to be of and how I want to give it back into the community. And that's what led me to
Mhm.
Culture Encounters, because again, we're in times where everything is centered around cultural awareness, desensitizing communities, and impacting communities where you can make a measurable difference itself. So I really liked what Cultural Encounters is doing within the communities, and what better way to do it with arts and food itself. I think
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
and went through the interview, got to meet Alma. She's a great individual,
Yeah.
an inspiring individual itself. And we began the process of being on the board itself. And then we went through the voting process, and I was voted the board president of Culture Encounters. And I've been the president for a little bit over a year now.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. That's awesome. I'm glad you talked through that process a little bit because me and many others are probably unfamiliar with how it works. You don't just join a board, right? You have to go through a vetting process and everything. So I'm really glad you talked about that. So,
Right.
and I'm glad I'm gonna make her blush somewhere because I'm glad you mentioned Amma and just how incredible of a person she
She
is.
is. She's an amazing individual.
What's always inspired me about her is her ability to just bring people together. Like she'll know someone from somewhere, and then she'll know someone from another walk of life, and be like, "Hey, you guys should meet and do something." And then, like, something amazing happens pretty much all the time. So, like, I can't say enough good things about her.
Right.
She's incredible. So
Absolutely.
let's talk a little bit about, and you had talked about wanting to give back, as far as culture goes. And I'm so glad that you are here with us. So how have your life experiences, the things that make you you,
Right.
how have those experiences shaped the way that you kind of see multiculturalism?
So that can span from A to Z. For
Sure.
example,
Right.
I'm one of West African descent itself. So, for people that are not familiar with that, in an African culture, specifically West African culture, everyone, you're related to everyone.
Right.
Everyone is either your aunt or your uncle or your mom's friends or your dad's friends. They're your aunt and your uncle. Your neighbors then become your family members at some point itself.
Right.
So, at an early age, I've been exposed to different walks of life, and that really taught me of how to appreciate people's cultures and not allowing simple things such as language to be a barrier between how you communicate with another individual, and getting to really respect individuals for who they are and what they bring to the table, and e- essentially meeting people where they're at.
Mhm.
In my field of work, I've been in community based settings for 15 plus years within underserved communities. So you get to see all works or all walks of life itself, and then you get to see the cultural barriers. So for me, what drives my passion is how do you bridge those cultural gaps that we see within community bases.
Right. Right. No, that makes sense. I love, you mentioned working with marginalized communities. Is that something that you did in West Africa and then took that with you over, when you came here to Rhode Island, or is that something that you started doing when you moved here?
So I was actually born here. My parents are from West Africa, but
Oh, okay, I got you. I missed that
I've
detail.
so I was actually born here. My parents are from West Africa, but I've been exposed to the West African culture ever since I was a year and 9 months. And I think a lot of times the misconception that you have is that Africa is a disarray, and it's
Hmm.
completely the opposite. When you go to visit, it's much more of a welcoming environment, it's much more of a togetherness, it's much more of unity that you see. So, having been exposed to that ever since I was a child, it gave me a different perspective in terms of when you're dealing with people. You're essentially not dealing with people, you're dealing with personalities. And what is the underlying factor when you're dealing with personalities is people's values, people's beliefs, and what that system looks like.
Right, right. Um, that makes sense, absolutely. And so you then so talk a little bit about before we get into Rhode Island specifically. You just let me know that you are a first generation American. What has that experience been like for you growing up, or being born here, but you have this amazing, rich cultural heritage. In another country in what in the West African culture. What has that experience been like for you? Kind of having to has it been hard to navigate any sort of like um acceptance struggle, or how is that? Just talk a little bit about what it's been like for you as a first generation America, because I know lots of people I've spoken to have not always had the easiest time with that just because of um some of the people in America unfortunately are, while most are wonderful, we all know that unfortunately it's not always the case. So talk a little bit about that.
So for me, the bridging of the cultures wasn't actually a struggle for me itself, because I was exposed at a young age in terms of what good ethics are, what good morals are. So I think, as an individual, if that foundation is stable, it doesn't matter what sorts of situations you may be faced with in life when
Mhm.
dealing with different populations or different races. That doesn't determine who you are as a person.
Right, exactly. And I guess that goes back to what you were saying with giving back and embracing, like you used the word bridge with, multiculturalism, and really I think speaks to the heart of what we do here of getting more people to embrace what makes us unique as humans in our differences. So
Exactly so.
yeah, I think that definitely is a great representation of that. So let's talk about Rhode Island a little bit. Uh,
Absolutely.
let's talk about the Ocean State.
The
Uh,
ocean state, that's where everyone needs to be.
Yeah, I'm getting that. Uh, so you were born in Rhode Island, or
No, I
have you?
wasn't born in Rhode Island. I was born in New Jersey.
Okay,
And I moved to Rhode Island for schooling and just never moved back to New
Nice.
York. And I've loved it here. Um, like I said to you before we started recording, we don't even have a Red Lobster. So when you
Right.
want your seafood during the summertime, you just go down by the bay and you can get your fresh seafood, and you can come home and steam it or grill it or do whatever you want. But on the flip side, our winters are brutal.
Hmm.
But I do like that they do have the small knit communities, and you have the collaboration within the communities itself and things of that nature. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that you may have instances where you have disparities, and to be quite honest, that's everywhere within the US right now, if we
Sure.
want to be transparent of what it is. But I think that Rhode Island has been home for me, where I have a peace of mind, and it's surrounded by Massachusetts. So you get to see I get to enjoy both the best of both states.
Oh, yeah, it's true. Yeah, that's awesome.
Right.
So you talked about being surrounded by water. What impact has that had on you? Growing, like living there now. You're completely surrounded by water. Does that lead to a lot of water-based activities for people? Are people doing a lot of stuff in the water?
Yep, it leads to a lot of water-based activities. I think they have the regular sailing thing that they do in Newport. You have a lot of sightseeing. You have the Newport mansions. There's a lot of history in Rhode Island itself, if we're dating it back to slavery itself.
Right.
So to now see the present day of how they're trying to decentralize those stigmatization that Rhode Island was faced with, in terms of it being called, I think it 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 was called the Providence Plantation for the longest itself. If you know about
Hmm.
the slavery history, and plantation itself is no longer associated with the name Rhode Island. So you see how um, change is coming, even though it may be slow, but it's gradually coming.
Sure.
I like that aspect of it itself.
I'm glad you mentioned that because a lot of people, especially like in history books, were basically taught from a young age that, oh, slavery was only an issue in the South. There wasn't prejudice or hatred or racism or any of that anywhere else in the United States. It was a Southern thing, and we know that's not true, right? It
Right.
affected everywhere. So the fact that it was even known as the Providence Plantation, I think, speaks to that. So I'm glad, even if it's slow progress, that some progress is happening.
Absolutely.
Really.
And Rhode Island was part of the first original 13 colonies, so it
Right.
only makes sense.
Right. I was gonna say, wasn't it colony like it wasn't one, I think that was Delaware, but it was one of the first ones, right? To ratify.
I know it's part of the 13.
Yeah,
So you're
right,
taking me
right.
back to 10th grade now, and 11th grade.
Oh gosh. It makes me think of those old Schoolhouse Rock videos.
Exactly. So
Shout out to Schoolhouse Rock. That thing was awesome. Man, I wish they still I don't even know if they still show those videos or not. I hope they do. Um, but so we talked about back in the day, you all over the New England area, like even the 13 colonies, we talked about it. New England was known primarily for its like shipbuilding and aquarian, I guess, food, aquarian agriculture, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
Is that still the case now? Is there still a lot of distribution of like seafood that comes out of Rhode Island?
I wouldn't be the best one to speak on that itself, because that's not my
Right,
line of work. But what I
right.
do know is that they have a lot of fresh seafood during
Hmm.
the summer, because no one is going fishing. I don't think, well, I would hope not during the winter months itself. But during the summer,
Right.
you're able to get fresh lobsters, fresh crabs, and it tastes good. So I would assume that they probably still do have the trade, but I
Hmm.
won't be the best one to speak on that.
Right. No, that makes sense. Do you ever go fishing? Do you ever spend time doing stuff like that? Get in the
No,
fresh
Chad.
fish?
Mm-mm.
I I can't do it. I don't have the patience for it.
Not at all. Not at
I
all.
I I like more power to people who do, especially those who like transport and as a consumer gift. But like
Hmm.
I don't have the patience to sit and you know um sit in a boat for hours on end, especially early in the morning. So
Right, not at
more,
all.
more,
Not
more,
me.
yeah, more power to people who can. I can't do it. What's your favorite seafood if you had to pick?
Shrimps. I like
Shrimp?
shrimps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. That's my favorite.
Mhm.
So let's talk about food a little bit. You had mentioned seafood. Are there any specific dishes or anything that when you think about Rhode Island, we talked a lot about seafood, but are there any other dishes that come to mind that Rhode Island is known for?
I think they're known for their clam chowders.
Okay, so kind of like the Massachusetts kind
Right.
of New England
I
clam
think they're
chowder.
known for their clam chowders. Yes.
Okay, and I've never had a chowder before. What is that? What is the difference between like a chowder and like just like a regular soup?
I think a chowder is much more creamier. It has much more of a creamier base to it
Okay,
than just like a regular soup that's just a bit much more light and watery.
got you. That makes sense.
Hmm.
So what about you had mentioned before we came on the air that there are a lot there's a lot of diversity, cultural diversity within Rhode Island.
Hmm.
So talk a little bit more about that. What have you noticed as far as the cultural diversity that's present where you live?
So, in within our communities, you have a lot of Hispanics, you have a lot of Portuguese, you have a lot of Cape Verdeans, you have a lot of Liberians, you have a mixture of Senegalese and Gambians, you have Ghanaians, you have Nigerians. So it's essentially a melting pot, I like to call it. You also have the Italians and the Caucasian people, but I think if you're measuring metrics from 20 years ago to now, the population trend has certainly evolved in
Right.
terms of having much more of a diverse population itself, as opposed to just being concentrated on one.
No, I got you. Where are you in Rhode Island? Are you in Providence
I live in
or
East
in
Providence.
East Providence? Okay.
Hmm.
So what percentage of the island is would be considered part of Providence? Is it a pretty good portion?
I would think a pretty good portion, but if you look at it on the map, Rhode Island is surrounded by Massachusetts on both sides itself.
Right.
So I think either way you go, you're dibbling and dabbling in terms of what populations you see. But for example, the Hispanics are much more saturated in the Providence area, as
Right.
opposed to East Providence that has more of like the Portuguese and things of that nature. And then if you're moving further north, like the Pawtucket area, you would probably have more of the Cape Verdeans and more of the Liberians,
Got
per
you.
se. Hmm.
So, I know, we hear about in New York that most of the, the populations, the ethnicities present kind of, have like distinct neighborhoods. Is that similar? Is that a similar experience in Rhode Island? Is there a lot of,
I think you have that everywhere you go within the U.S. itself.
okay,
Um, I think you should, like, objectively speaking, I think anywhere you go, you'd have more populations that are dense in certain areas and less in others. So I think it's fair to say that's the same in Rhode Island.
right, right. No, got you. Good to know. Yeah, and I think it's good to know that too, because sometimes we forget, because that there are all of these different cultures out there and that are present within each community,
Hmm.
and making their own wonderful communities as well. When we get stuck into, not necessarily stuck, but we, sometimes as people don't think about that. So I think it's awesome to draw attention to that and bring it to attention. Um, so with if somebody I like to ask this question. If somebody had 24 hours to spend in Rhode Island in I guess you said East Providence is where you are,
Hmm.
right? If
Hmm.
somebody had 24 hours in East Providence to spend, what's one thing that they would have to do?
Not necessarily in East Providence, but I would encourage them to take the drive to Newport itself. And you don't necessarily have to go through it through the 95. You can go through the 195 and go through Portsmouth area and head to Newport and really tour the Newport mansions and go on the cliff walk itself and really see the ocean. it's really beautiful. So if that was one thing I would tell a person to do if they come to see me in East Providence, is to take the drive to Newport.
Wonderful. Yeah. So take the drive to Newport. That's the thing on our homework. And if I'm ever in Rhode
It
Island,
is,
that's what I'll
and
do.
go down to Newport Mansions, and it's beautiful.
Newport Mansion. Got
Yes,
it.
it is.
So, another thing I also like to discuss when we discuss, when we do these road trips, um, is so we pay an homage or respect to the indigenous cultures of each state. I think is very important, as the
Hmm.
fact that most of us in our our heritage were not the first people to settle in America. So we're um what do you know about whatever indigenous populations were present in Rhode Island, and does Rhode Island do anything to honor these people, or is the influence of indigenous, I guess is a better way of saying it, is the influence of the indigenous cultures that have represented Rhode Island, are they still present there? Are they still represented there?
They are still present and they're still represented. However, objectively speaking, again,
Right, right,
I feel like more could be done
always.
for them itself.
Right,
However, they are represented. They are here, but I don't feel enough is being done. If that makes
right.
sense.
No, I think that's probably, like you were saying, true across the board, and unfortunately not surprising. Do you know what populations would have settled there?
Wouldn't I believe they're the Native Americans.
Well, yeah, right. The Native. Do you know like what tribe specifically would have been?
I would be lying to you if I said I knew exactly what tribe it was.
No, and that's totally, and I love your honesty and admire that. And I think that the fact that like information is not like readily like immediately given to you when you move to Rhode Island shows that more needs to be done. So
Right.
I think that that's awesome. That I think it's awesome that you're transparent about that, and hopefully, even by having this conversation, we're starting a conversation about you know giving more emphasis and more respect to like the government, or not the government necessarily, but like the powers that be in Rhode Island to hopefully do more for those populations. So that's
Absolutely.
really what we're all about here is trying to help bring people together from all different walks of life.
Right. I
Uh,
think the only one I know of would be the Wampanoags, but I
okay,
think that they are probably also referred to or are associated with the Narragansett people, because the Narragansett is heading more towards the Newport area, the beach area, and things
right,
of that nature itself. But uh, I want to say one of the tribes is the Wampanoags.
awesome. So that's great. And if anybody else knows listening to this, anything about the history of the indigenous populations and cultures in Rhode Island, please post in the comments below. Let us know what you know. We love learning. But thank you. I want to say thank you very much, Mariama, for taking some time today to be with us and chat so openly and candidly about your experiences. I can see your passion for bringing people together and multiculturalism, and your love for your state. I think are really really admirable, and it's very apparent talking to you. So I just wanted to express my gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chad, for having me on your
Ye-
show.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for listening, and have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time.